is Thursday, May the 29th, and this is a review session for Economics 2023, Microeconomics. There are 6 of you here, and I appreciate your attendance. That means there are probably approximately 80 people who are not here. So we'll see how this goes, and I'll post this video to YouTube. So, where would you like to begin? Is there anything that comes to mind in the sense of the basics? What causes the demand curve to shift? What causes the supply curve to shift? How do I read equilibrium price and quantity? Any kind of questions, issues in there? We were commenting earlier that the last slide on the PowerPoint entitled Coincidental Shifts, the last slide in that PowerPoint has a summary of the 5 factors that shift demand and the 5 factors that shift supply. You might use that as a reference page as you're working through these problems. You will not be allowed that reference page on the exam. Okay? So, we'll look at Appendix A and Appendix C first. Do you have particular questions from either of those?
Yes.
Name one and please read it to me.
All right.
Which one?
Appendix A.
Yes.
Question 16.
Okay, Appendix A, question 16. Let's go.
Publishers can produce either books or magazines. A rise in the market price of magazines will do what?
They can produce books or magazines, and a rise in the price of what?
Market price of magazines.
Okay, so the price of magazines is going to rise. When they say they can produce this or that, what does that make the relationship between these two goods?
They're substitutes.
Substitutes in production, as very much distinguished from substitutes in consumption, where you and I can consume Pepsi or Coke. Different situation here. Our general rule of thumb for substitutes in production: an increase in the price of one, I'll call it A, is going to affect the supply of the other, because they are substitutes in production. And the relationship in the change here is inverse. That when the price of one goes up, the supply of the other declines. This is the rule. If you like writing that way or in some other Sanskrit edition, no sweat. Look at what this means graphically. This is the market for A, and let's let A be books now, okay? And so we're going to have an increase in the price of books. B then is going to be magazines. So we'll have another graph over here for magazines, just to illustrate what's going on and some of the variations that can go with it. Here's the supply of books initially. And we're told that the price of, I'm sorry, I've got these backwards, don't I? Price of magazines rises. I've got these reversed. Easy to fix. Price of magazines, supply of books, magazines. An increase in the price of magazines. Look at this graph here. What's going to happen to that supply curve when the price goes up?
Nothing.
Nothing. Remember this phrase: price doesn't shift the curve. When you're just talking about a single good by itself, a change in its price doesn't shift either one of its curves. What happens? The price goes from price 1 to price 2. The curve doesn't shift. That's not one of the 5 things that shifts supply. So you go from one point on the curve to another point on the curve. What do we call that? When you move along the supply curve. A change in the quantity supplied. Okay? So over here, we're going to say that the price of magazines rose and that caused an increase in the quantity supplied of magazines. Price went up, so we decided, we decided to produce more. But what happened to books? All the publishers that have this choice to make see magazines as more profitable now. They shift their resources into the production of magazines, and everybody's producing fewer books. And so that's going to mean that the supply of books, because the price of something else as a substitute increased, the supply of books is going to decrease. Okay so far? When the supply curve shifts, we call it a change in supply, not quantity supplied. So when we get the decrease in supply, and that's what this is saying, the decrease in supply, we also will observe that we go from equilibrium at A to equilibrium at B. We tracking okay on that? If you're not clear, let me know.
I'm just wondering, and there's several questions like this, that it seems like there would be two corresponding answers. There's only one that should
There's
stand.
only one. 99.9% of the time. Sometimes I make a mistake, but if that happens, we'll throw it out. Tell me, what's a proper way to describe this graph? What happened?
Price went up, quantity went down. Yeah, price went up, quantity supply went down.
Okay. First off, the supply decreased. As a result, the price increased, and the equilibrium quantity decreased. Was there a change in demand?
No.
No, because the demand curve didn't move. But when you go from point A to point B along the same demand curve, what do we call that? It's a decrease, because you're at a smaller level, right? Decrease in the quantity demanded. So there's about 4 or 5 ways I could give you a correct answer to describe what's happened on this graph. And you've got to be ready to recognize them. Okay so far? This is what's going on in the question. That's why I suggest strongly you draw the graphs and understand what's going on before you start reading those answers. Because I work real hard making all those answers sound pretty good. And if you just dive right to the answers, you're going to be going, oh, geez, there's at least 2 right answers here. No, you're wrong. Got you. Okay? Read me the first answer.
Increase the supply of books.
There will be an increase in the supply of books. Is that what happened? What happened? There was a decrease in the supply. So as you study these questions, there is value in understanding why the wrong answers are wrong, just as much as finding the right one. What's the second answer?
Decrease the supply of books.
There will be a decrease in the supply of books. That's a correct answer. What's the third answer?
Increase the supply of magazines.
There will be an increase in the supply of magazines. Was there an increase in supply over here?
Price.
There was an increase in the quantity supplied. Movement along the curve. But that one would sound right if you fail to distinguish the terminology. Quantity supplied versus supply. The fourth answer?
Decrease the supply of magazines.
A decrease in the supply of magazines. Well, loose breath, the supply didn't change at all. The damn curve didn't move. Ain't no change in supply of magazines. Period. Click, shut up, get on the road. Okay? How are we doing? Now be careful, because one of the greatest dangers in microeconomics, and even macro, is it's real easy to follow this stuff when somebody explains it. But then you go and sit down by yourself with a question and you wonder, why did they change the language? Doesn't make any sense, okay? So 90% of the problem, I think, for most folks, is understanding what's going on. All right? That's A, Appendix A, number 16. Let's pick up another one. Anybody?
57.
A,
A.
Appendix A, number 57. Would you please read it to me?
Which of the following will increase the demand for compact discs?
Okay, hang on. We want to know what will increase the demand for compact discs. Not that anybody knows what those are anymore. Don't look at anything, look at me. What are the 5 things that'll shift the demand curve?
More buyers.
Increase in the number of buyers, or change in the number of buyers.
Increased income.
A change in their expectations. Buyers and their expectations kind of think them together. And closely allied with that is tastes and preferences. Frequently, those 3 work together, okay? Something becomes more popular, therefore more people are buying it, therefore maybe their expectations have changed. Those go together a lot. What are the other 2 big ones that shift supply, demand?
Incomes.
Incomes, which can increase or decrease demand. Typically, if your income goes up, what happens for most goods? The demand increases. What do we call those goods? Normal. Okay? What if your income goes up and you buy less of something? What do we call that?
Inferior.
It's an inferior good. So when you read in the questions, you got to be able to recognize this is a normal good or an inferior good. Now, I'm not trying to confuse you on that. If you are in the exam with me and you run across that question, let me know. Do you mean for this product to be normal or inferior? I'll tell you that. What are compact discs? Are they normal good? You sure?
They see a little bit bigger these days.
Yeah,
They seem kind of shoddy and out of date. Let's treat them as normal. Okay? What's the other thing that changes demand?
Price of a substitute and consumption increases.
A change in the price of a related good,
Yeah.
which could be a substitute or could be a complement. And so we have to be very sensitive in our reading to pick that out early. So, we want to know what will increase the demand for CDs. Think through it. What has to happen to the number of buyers? There'd have to be more buyers. So, an increase in the number of buyers, that would be a good answer. Some sort of, and this is kind of, depending on how it's worded, a change in their expectations. An increase in the tastes and preferences for CDs. What about income? Y means income. What would have to happen to income for people to buy more CDs?
More income.
We think it's a normal good, so we would say if there was an increase in income, that would be one of them. What if the goods were complements? So the price of a complement, let's say CD players, what would have to happen to them for people to buy more CDs? They'd have to get cheaper. Okay? So if there was a decrease in the price of a complement, what about substitute? 8-track tapes, how's that? Cassette tapes, right? What? If the price of a substitute increased, we'd say, well, I don't need that, I'll get the CDs and play them on that. These are the answers you're looking for. I don't expect you to list that in the exam. Okay? But recognize this is basically what you're looking for in the answers. So let's take the answers on that question one at a time and ask how they apply or not. What's the first answer?
and an increase in the price of CD players.
An increase in the price of CD players. What's a CD player?
Complement.
It's a complement. An increase in the price of a complement. Nope, it would have to be a decrease in the price of the complement. So we throw that answer out.
Okay. A decrease in the price of CDs.
A decrease in the price of CDs. Will that increase the demand for CDs? Price doesn't shift the curve. What will that change? If the price of CDs drops, what happens? What happens?
Quantity supply will drop.
Price drops. The quantity demanded increases. Remember? Here's the demand curve. If the price goes from $10 a piece to $2 a piece, we go from this point on the curve to this point on the curve. That's an increase in the quantity demanded. Movement along the curve is a change in quantity demanded. So we know that that's not right. Price doesn't shift the demand curve. What's the third answer?
Increase in cost of making CDs.
An increase in the cost of making CDs. How would we show that in a graph? an increase in the cost of making CDs. Here's the demand, here's the supply, an increase in the cost of production.
The supply shifts.
Supply decreases. We go from A to B, new equilibrium points. Is that a change in demand? Is that a change in demand? Change in demand means the whole curve moved. Did the demand curve move? No. What is this? Change in quantity demanded. So that answer is not correct. Let's hope the fourth one is right. What's it say?
Increase in consumer income.
An increase in incomes. And we said, well, we're going to assume it's a normal good, and yep, that matches. Okay? But you had a lot to learn in that question by going through every single answer and analyzing why it is wrong or why it is right. That's what I want to encourage you to do. Preferably working together with some other folks and explaining this back and forth. Good question to illustrate a lot of points. For information purposes, the first exam has approximately 40 questions. You have 75 minutes to complete it. So a question every 2 minutes. Which if you know it, you'll walk out of here in 20 or 25 minutes.
It's all multiple choice.
Yep, all multiple choice, first test.
So the second and third test.
I haven't decided about the second and third test. Largely multiple choice. Okay? We good on whatever number that was?
67.
67, good. Anybody else got a question you want to put up on the board? Yes, ma'am.
Number 71.
In Appendix A.
Yes.
Appendix A, number 71. Please read me the question.
Sprite and 7-Up are substitutes in consumption.
Okay, stop. Sprite and 7-Up are substitutes in consumption. Go ahead.
The price of 7-Up falls
Price of 7-Up falls
at the same time that the cost of producing Sprite increases.
at the same time the cost of producing or cost of production for Sprite does what?
Increases.
Increases. What's the price fall and the price of 7-Up going to do? I mean, which good are we really talking about here? Which good are we analyzing? Sprite. Is this going to affect the market for Sprite? The price of 7-Up falling? If the price of 7-Up falls, is that going to change the market for Sprite? Yes. Because they are substitutes in consumption. So, and here's the way I tend to write the rules, these are now substitutes in consumption, not production, which we did earlier. If the price of one good falls, what happens to the other good when they're substitutes in consumption? The demand changes, and for substitutes, they move in the same direction. Think about the logic. Good. You can use logic? Yeah, how about that? If 7-Up is cheaper, we buy more 7-Up, and therefore we're not buying nearly as much Sprite. So when I draw this, I'm going to say, in the market for Sprite, there's going to be the initial equilibrium and then a decrease in demand. You okay with that? That's the first part of the question. I'm going to go from point A to point B. And then we pick up the second piece of information. The cost of production for Sprite increases. I'm going to draw a separate graph here because which curve is affected?
Supply.
The supply. The supply of Sprite's going to be affected because it costs more to produce it. If it costs more to produce it and you're a producer, what are you going to do? You're going to produce less of it. Okay? So your supply is going to decrease. Equilibrium is going to go from point C to point D. And now we're ready to figure out what happens in the question. Okay? When we look at the first graph up here, what happened to price? Went from A to B, the price fell. Everybody reading that with me okay? What happened to quantity in the market? A to B, we have a smaller quantity. So we see that force is at work. We look over at the next graph over here. What happened to price?
Went up.
Price rose. What happened to quantity?
Decrease.
It decreased from here to here. That force is also at work. And when we put these together, what do we see they have in common? Quantity is definitely being forced to a smaller quantity, but we get mixed signals on the price. May go up, may go down, may in fact stay the same. So we say price is ambiguous or uncertain or indeterminate. We use those terms interchangeably. How are we doing so far?
Can you compare that to C10?
I will in a moment. Okay? Think what we've done so far. Have we looked at the answers yet? No. You get this far through the question so you know what's going on before you go to the answers. Read me the first answer.
The price of Sprite will rise and its sales will be indeterminate.
Price of Sprite will rise. True or false?
False.
False. It may rise, but it not necessarily will rise. Okay? Throw that answer out. What's answer B?
The price of Sprite will be indeterminate and sales of Sprite will decrease.
Good. Price will be indeterminate and sales will decrease. Bingo, we got a winner. Read the third answer.
The price of Sprite will be indeterminate and sales of Sprite will increase.
Good. Price will be indeterminate. That's good. But sales will increase. Sales are decreasing. Okay, when we say sales, we mean the equilibrium quantity. What's the fourth answer?
None of the above.
None of the above. Well, we found one of the above. Bingo. Hallelujah. It's mother time. Okay so far? Let's do from Appendix C, let's do number 10. I happen to have that on the board over there, fortunately. Appendix C, number 10. Appendix A and C are both supply and demand. You're manipulating the demand curves and supply curves a lot. Appendix B and D have to do with some applications, some topics, if you will. We'll get to those here in a bit. In Appendix C, number 10, we say that the price of hamburgers increases, if I'm reading that right. Is that right? Read me C10.
Pizza and hamburgers are substitutes in consumption.
Okay, stop there. Pizza and hamburgers are substitutes, be real careful when you read that, in consumption. Not production, consumption. So what happens?
The price of hamburgers rise.
The price of hamburger meat?
It just says hamburgers.
Okay. Price of hamburgers rises. Okay, that's fine. And?
At the same time, the cost of producing pizza decreases.
The cost of producing pizza decreases. So which market are we going to look at?
Pizza.
Pizza. We've already looked at, we know the price of hamburger is going to affect the pizza market because people are choosing one or the other. If you have an increase in the price, hamburgers, for some good that is a substitute in consumption, what happens in the pizza market? Which curve is affected? The supply curve or the demand curve for pizza? Substitutes in consumption. Price of one affects demand for the other. Okay? Because you're consuming it. So the demand for pizza is going to change. If hamburgers get expensive, are we going to buy more pizza or less? We're going to buy more because hamburgers are too damn expensive. So we get an increase here. When we have substitutes in consumption, price affects demand of the other, arrows move together. Also, for pizza, the cost of production drops. What curve is affected for pizza? Cost of production, which curve does it move? Supply curve. If cost of production is lower, what happens to supply?
Increase.
We produce more of it. There's an increase in the supply. So these are the two things that are going on. If you don't identify this correctly, you'll never get through the question. So now we can graph these. Increase in demand, causing price to rise and quantity to increase. That force is at work. Everybody tracking that with me okay? And when we have an increase in the supply from S to S prime, we go from A to B, we see that the price falls and the quantity increases. This force is at work. Put these together. What do they have in common? Quantity is increasing, but price has mixed signals, and so it's ambiguous. All you have to do is 1,000 of these, and they're really easy. Questions or comments? I'm a little bit iffy here. You all seem to be paying very close attention, but nobody's nodding their head.
Supply curve and demand curve. Can you make that a little more?
That's the demand curve, also called the demand schedule. It's how much is bought at each price. It's that whole line. If I go from one point to another point, that's a change in the quantity demanded. The demand didn't change. Okay? When I say supply, that's the supply right there. The supply curve is the supply. It's how much is offered for sale at each price, each of these points on the curve. The whole curve is supply. So change in demand, the whole demand curve shifts. Change in supply, the whole supply curve shifts.
Now, can you add in change in production and change in consumption? As far as,
Not sure how to use those terms. You mean substitutes in production?
well, on some of the questions, those are the terms that I'm trying to.
Find me the questions and let's absolutely go through them.
Actually, I was stuck on 5, which is very different. I don't know why. It was on
A5?
Yes, it was on the Nissan and the Toyota.
Good, let's do that. Appendix A number 5, what does it say?
The price of Nissans increased. What would happen in the market for Toyotas?
Okay, price of Nissans increases. What happens in the market for Toyotas? First question you got to ask is, how are these goods related? They're substitutes. Are they substitutes in consumption or production? Consumption, because we buy one or the other. Is there one company that makes both those cars?
No.
If there was, they would be substitutes in production, but they're sold by two different companies. They're not substitutes in production, they're substitutes in consumption. We know with substitutes in consumption, let's kind of write that up here, substitutes in consumption, we know the price of one affects the demand for the other. And which way do the arrows move? Together. Okay so far? The logic is, if Nissans get real damn expensive, we're all going over and buy Toyotas. Increased demand. If you want to remember the rule, you remember it that for substitutes in consumption, price of one, demand of the other, arrows together. Contrast that with substitutes in production. I can produce magazines or books. If the price of magazines goes up, what happens in the market for books? If we're playing substitutes in production, production is supply, That's going to change the supply of the other good. Okay so far? And now, for substitutes in production, the arrows move opposite. If we can make more money selling magazines, we're going to produce less books. The industry. Does that help any?
Well, I came up with the supply of Toyotas would increase, and you said the price of Toyotas would increase.
Well, what happens is you go here first. An increase in the price of Nissans will increase the demand for Toyotas. And so when we look at that, we say, well, an increase in the demand for Toyotas. What will happen? We'll go from A to B, which means that the price of Toyotas will also rise, and sales of Toyotas will also increase.
I see that.
And so there's 3 or 4 correct answers I could have given you. Good. Good. Sir,
Oh, no, I was just.
move your hand, man, this is an auction.
All right, I got one.
Okay, let me erase this for a second. Can I erase this? Everybody okay? Okay.
Number A17, I actually just got 2 answers for it.
Appendix A, number 17. Go ahead.
If incomes go up, then
Incomes go up,
then the demand for ramen noodles and inferior goods will what?
then the demand for ramen noodles will fill in the blank, huh? Okay. All right. We have a term in economics we use sometimes called a WAG. You ever heard of a WAG? It's called a wild ass guess. You are entitled to a WAG periodically in class. Are ramen noodles a normal good or an inferior good? Why?
You buy more when you have less money.
That's right. When you're really broke, when you're down to the end of financial aid, the paycheck hadn't come through, little ramen noodles and some hot sauce and anything else you can think of to throw in it. Right? Pickles, beets.
Cheese.
Huh?
Slice of cheese if you got it.
Slice of cheese, absolutely. Hot dogs. Whatever you can pick through the neighbor's
Ramen
garbage.
noodles. Chef.
We know then, and if you weren't sure, again, you would ask, we know this is an inferior good. And if your income goes up, what happens with inferior goods? We just said, we buy more, I'm sorry, we buy less of them.
You buy less.
I got enough money now to buy Spam, I don't know. So, the demand for ramen noodles will do what? Increase. What are the answers on that question?
An increase of the demand, a decrease for the demand, an increase in the quantity supplied, or a decrease in the quantity supplied. That's why I got 2 answers.
Oh, you got 2 answers. Huh? What does this look like? Demand decreases, right? Shift to the left. We go from A to B. Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Is that a decrease in demand? Yeah, that's a correct answer, right? It also said this could be called a decrease in quantity supplied. Is that a decrease in quantity supplied?
Yes. That was the answer you gave, yeah.
Why is that a decrease in quantity supplied?
It moved off supply.
Because you move along the supply curve to a smaller quantity. Decrease in the quantity supplied. So yes, there are 2 correct answers
Okay.
there.
Okay.
So I wasn't crazy.
Yes. And frankly, there's a couple in there with 2 answers, and I leave those out there just to aggravate you.
Yeah.
And when someone comes to me aggravated, I know they've been studying. Okay? Because if you looked at that and said, oh, well, that's the right answer, and you went on your way, you didn't learn a damn thing. Those are intentional.
Okay.
And no, I won't tell you how many there are.
Oh, we could tell you.
You think so?
Yeah, because we've been aggravated.
If it was easy, everybody would do it, right? All right, what else?
74.
Appendix A, number 74. Read it, please.
If a meal of spaghetti were a normal good, and
Uh-huh.
a decrease in the price of sauce, followed by a fall in incomes, would result in what?
A decrease in the price of salt?
Sauce.
Sauce, I'm sorry. A decrease in the price of sauce. What else?
Followed by a fall in incomes.
And a fall in incomes. Why is income a decrease in income? So we're looking at spaghetti. We're told it's a normal good, and we got two things going on, right? What is sauce for spaghetti? A complement. Okay, let's draw that out. The price of sauce, which is a complement for spaghetti. How will the price of sauce affect the spaghetti market? Which curve is affected? When we talk about complements, we're talking about demand curves being changed. Okay, and when we have complements and one has a down arrow, the other side, the demand curve, has the opposite, has an increase. Or if you want to think of it, if sauce gets cheap, we buy more spaghetti because we're going to go out and buy more sauce. Okay, so far? That's change number one. And then when incomes fall, and we're told it's an inferior good, what a curve is affected by incomes? Supply or demand?
Demand if income falls.
Income affects demand. So now the demand for spaghetti, if you have less money and it's inferior, what do you do with it?
It says normal.
You buy more of
It
it.
says normal.
Just like, I'm sorry, it's normal. It's all right. My mistake. You gotta catch me like that. Because my dream, of course, is to give you the wrong information and let you go home with it and really get aggravated. So, if you have less money and it's a normal good, what do you do with spaghetti?
You buy less.
You buy less of it. Now look what's happening here. Look what's happening. We're showing an increase in demand by some forces, a decrease in demand by some forces. If we tried to draw that, which way would you move the demand curve?
To the right for increase.
Both directions.
You would try to move it in both directions. Which way does it move the furthest?
Increase.
We don't know. So, since we don't know whether it goes up here, which would be a higher price and a greater quantity, or it goes down here, which would be a lower price and a lower quantity, what can we conclude about price and quantity? Not a damn thing. We have no idea. Go ahead.
I figured that one a little bit different.
Go ahead.
Instead of sauce and spaghetti being a complement, I thought of sauce as a cost of production for spaghetti, which changed the supply, which came up with the same answer.
Okay. I think
Is
you're...
how I figured that in my head, it wound up being the same answer.
Well, it by chance wound up being the same answer. This is why when you take the exam, you're going to have a sheet of multiple choice questions and a Scantron answer sheet. And I'm going to ask you to mark your answers on your test sheet as well as Scantron. And if you in there indicated, I'm treating this as a cost of production, and the answers were different, as soon as we found that out, I'd go back and give you credit for it. Because that's, in fact, perhaps even a better assumption, that it's a cost of production.
We're talking about the future prices of pasta, not spaghetti. So I was thinking pasta and sauce were the...
Did the question say spaghetti or pasta?
The question said spaghetti, the answers said
Said
pasta.
pasta. I guess I probably ought to look at that one and be a little more consistent. That's probably a
So
question,
in my head, I just figured it a little bit different.
you figured it exactly right, and I don't want you to lose credit
Wound up
for it.
having the same answer, but...
Yeah, but I don't want you to lose credit on something like that on an exam.
Right.
So, if you find something like that on an exam, hopefully you're here at the exam, come up and tell me about it, and I'll be watching out for whatever possible answers there are. Thank you. Yes, ma'am?
Could you also come to the conclusion, because you're giving like two different forces of demand, and then there's no information about the supply, that if there's no like conclusion because
Yes.
there's no supply?
Yes, but think about this. What if we had instead said that, oh, well, this is an inferior good? How would that change our answer? This would be an increase in demand and an increase in demand. What does that tell us? Demand's gonna increase. So what's gonna happen to price?
Higher price.
Prices are gonna rise and sales or quantity is gonna increase. Yeah. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
So you're saying, like, we work stuff on the test, and then you'll look at how we,
I won't necessarily, I'll run them through the Scantron machine and see how many you missed.
okay.
But when I report your grades back to you, hopefully you'll be making notes along the test as you go, and you say, I think I want to come look at that. I think he probably didn't pay attention or didn't go back and look because I assumed this was a compliment.
Okay.
Come on in. You're always welcome to come in and look at the exam.
Okay.
Absolutely.